Okay, hello, welcome to my channel, and sorry about the posts. I've been really bad at videoing. Okay, we're on chapter 2 for this one. I'm gonna just see. Okay, okay, and by the way, in case you don't know, I'm reading because I am trying to get rid of a lot of books. This is Laura Ingalls Wilder, a biography. And we're on chapter 2. This is called Indian Territory. Again, right now, yes, I am standing because I feel like standing right now. And because my iPad is also charging, that's why it says. Okay. Our Uncle Sam is rich enough to give us all a farm. Those words made Paul Ingalls happy. He and Ma had worked hard to pay for their Wisconsin land, but in depression following the Civil War, all of the money had been in a bank failure. The idea of 160 acres of free government land on the prairie made Paul eager to go west. He wanted to stake his claim on the land the government was giving away to the farmers. That's the ticket, he exclaimed when he thought about following the sunset west into the new country. The big woods was filling up with people from settlements like Pepan and others along the Mississippi River, farmers, and pretending the forests. They were establishing new homes and farms, just as Pa and Ma had done. By the late 1860s, there were so many Swedish neighbors living there at the Ingalls farm. Ma enjoyed having people nearby, but the interfered with Pa's hunting and trapping. He knew that in the West, deer, antelope, prairie chickens, and wild turkeys ran thick and free over the level land. In the evenings around the fireplace, Pa and Ma talked about moving west. They always discussed their plans together carefully. Pa was ready to leave Wisconsin, but Ma looked around her snug house and at Mary and Laura, who were so young, and she wondered why they should leave home behind. Pa always remembered that Ma had been a teacher, and he said she had a way with words as a schoolgirl. She had written a composition about her feelings for the home and family who wished to leave home and wandered forth in the world to meet the tempests and the storms. Ma had written, "Give me a place at home with a seat of the fireside where all the happy and free." But as Laura once said, my parents processed the spirit of the founder to a marked degree. They decided to follow the tradition of their families and moved west. In 1868, Pa and Ma sold their farm to a Swedish settler named Josef Gosen. Their destination was Kansas. To prepare for the long trip, Wisconsin to Kansas, Pa fitted white waterproof canvas over the covering boughs to cover his wagon. That covered wagon would be a family's home until they could build another house. Ma packed all the belongings from the little house. They would fit in the wagon carefully. She wrapped the books she liked to read aloud to Pa. Their clothes, dishes, bedding, and keep asking Pa's fiddle rested softly between the quilts. It traveled with them, like a friendly member of the family, Jack, the bulldog with the dark spots on his tawny coat. Would follow the wagon west. It was important to have a good watchdog on a trip into the wild, untamed territory. Laura and Mary watched the preparations for the moving, but they were too young to help. Family and friends wished the English good fortune on their journey, although many of Pa's and Ma's brothers and sisters wondered why they are leaving. The big woods were good enough for them. On the day they left Wisconsin, Pa drove the horse-drawn covered wagon through the big woods to the shores of Lake Pepin. There was a thick ice on the lake, so it became a bridge to the west as Pa and his girls crossed over. On the other side was the state of Minnesota. The long journey west with the English family across the Minnesota, south through Iowa and Missouri, and finally west into the state of Kansas. Laura told on the trip in the book A Little House on the Prairie. Although she was too young to remember those experiences, Pa and Mom and Mary told her about it later. Yeah. Okay, you know. Okay. Wrote in where we couldn't remember many days it's been. We rode in the covered wagon all. We rode in the wagon all day long. However many days it has been for such a little girls. We have been stranded in woods and hills and creeks and rivers. We had crossed long bridges and been on ferry boats in 4 days. We have been going along flatlands covered with tall green grass with rabbits hid. Hey, one day saw the wagon. Okay. And they saw on this saw the wagon and prairie chickens scattered across the road. The days of travel were not always easy ones. There were dangerous, steep roads and streets across the lonely times of driving for miles without seeing another human being. Sometimes the rain and hot sun made the wagon miserable home. Because of Pa and Mom, Mary, Laura, and Phil, the wagon was home-like. Ma cooked good meals over the campfire when they stopped for the night, and Pa played the fiddle merrily, driving back the eerie sounds of the nighttime. His rifle was always in the wagon to keep them safe. Pa drove the wagon to the southern part of Kansas, and then they veered west. He rejoiced that the land was leveled and treeless. There was nothing like grassy plains under the sky, which covered like a blue bowl over the wagon. The English family came to the Vergis River. The horses pulled the loaded wagon across the river, and Pa stopped them in the frontier town called Indianapolis. But Pa saw no need to stay long. He wanted to open the prairie. The last stretch of the long journey continued another 13 miles southwest of Independence. And sorry if I'm saying this wrong. Pa called the land above the Vergis River, plus at the high prairie, a stream called Walnut Creek broke the monotony of the flat stretch of the land and trees along the banks, water and were important for the pioneer in the distance, blue-green puffs. Rose up from the prairie. There was nothing to astonish one rolling plan. From another on the high prairie, the sea of the grass was leveled and empty, looking in all directions. There was no one to ask for advice about the place where she covered the wagon and stopped. Pa just said to Ma, "Here's the place we've been looking for." The location where Pa and Ma decided to stop was in Roofland Township in Montague County, Kansas. This Pa and Ma knew, but what did they don't know what they had to pick a place on the land not legally open for the settlers to homestead. They had driven 3 miles into what she called the Osage. The Minish reserved a reservation set aside for the Indians. It was the home of the 7 bands of Osage Indians. The Osage Indians had lived along the Osage River in Missouri. During the early 1800s, when the settlers started moving into the Missouri hunting grounds, they were willing to give up their land and move west. In 1600s, the reservation included all the Montague County, was the section 3 miles slice of the land. The tribes in the camps along the Villages escaped, except while they were on the hunting trips farther west. During one of those trips, settlers like the English family entered the quiet, empty lands and started building homes. This is a little crappy. Pa did not bother to file a complaint on the land. If he would have found that he and his family were living on the Osage Reserve. The prairie was so vast, and Pa was so anxious to build a house, start a farm, that he was not considered with the business of obligation for the homestead land. His goal was to haul enough logs from the banks of the Walnut Creek to construct a cabin. Establish a new home on the prairie was a difficult process. Pa had to select and cut straight trees for logs, bringing them to the house site, and slowly raised the walls. A well was dug, fresh water. The log stable was built to keep the horses safe from the wolves that still roamed the prairie. On his hunting trips across the prairie, Pa considered other new settlers. Some were fortuners, men, including men Pa simply called Edwards, met the Scott family, and he was a Dr. George Tan, a black doctor who helped the Aldridge through sickness. Pa found them all to be nice folks. Charles Ingalls was a good carpenter, and he essentially worked with the neighbors as the pioneers did, but Pa worked alone with the sawed plow when they broke up in the grasslands into the fields, breaking the prairie for the first time was hard labor for the men. Behind the plow, and for the horses pulling it, tall grass country was not used to the steel edge of the plow, cutting and sawed and turning the grass under. Sometimes the dense root system under the grass was so big that Pa had to attack it with the axe before the plow could pass through. Laura was 3.5 of August 1870, and she remembered a trip in Mary Pa took across the prairie on one hot summer day. Mrs. Scott, their jolly neighbor lady, had come to visit Ma, and they said in the shoddy cabin, Pa wanted his girls to see an Indian camp along the track. They walked across the prairie until they reached a little hidden valley. The otters were away on a hunting trip, so their camp was deserted, but Pa showed Mary and Laura the ashes where fires had been in holes where tents poles had been sunk. And the dusty ground with the bright stalks of blue and red and green Indian beads. Mary and Laura hunted them for hours, with Pa's helping. When the summer sun was setting, Pa and his girls walked home to the cabin on a high prairie. They had left Miss Scott and Ma visiting too. Together. But when they got home, Ma was waiting in the bed dozing, and cooking of her arm was a tiny black-haired baby. Ma told Mary and Laura that this was their baby sister. Pa said that we'll name her Caroline after her ma, but they will call her Carrie. In the family Bible, Ma wrote Caroline Kelsett Ingalls, born on Wednesday, August 3rd, 1870, in Montague, Kansas. Not after long, baby Carrie was born. A visitor called at the Ingalls home. The United States census taker. The census was taken every 10 years. Every 10 years, whenever people live in Wisconsin or Kansas, Maine, or California. Although the census taker spelled the family name as Ingalls, the rest of his listing was correct. He recorded that Pa C.P. Ingalls was 34-year-old carpenter. Ma was 30 and listed as keeping house. Mary was 5, Laura was 3, and Carrie was only 2 weeks old. The census taker did not want to vote on Pa's new farm, nor those of the neighbors nearby. The reason was that the settlers had no ownership of the land. The land still belonged to the Ojai Indians. Indians often stopped at the Ingalls cabin. They appeared as suddenly as rabbits or prairie chickens coming out of the prairie grass. Pa had noduly built the cabin along the old Indian trail, which was still used by the Ojai. Sometimes without sound, Indian braves popped in through the doorway. Like all the visitors, they could be friendly or unfriendly, welcome or troublesome. Most of them were hungry. Ma gave them cornbread, and usually they left satisfied. Ma complained when the Indians visited while they were wearing smelly skunk skins. Pa encountered Indians while he hunted. They seemed friendly enough, although he and they would not communicate. But as more on-top covered wagons drove into their land in a carriage, grass were up so they could see their hunting lands were being deserted. The promises by the United States government were being invalid. The trails had been destroyed by log cabins and barns, and as had happened before, the wild animals the Indians hunted for food were being driven away. Rumors passed from one prairie cabin to the next, saying that the Indians were angry. The government sent any cavalry to patrol the prairie. Oh yeah. Probably after this chapter, I'm gonna take a little bit of a break because it's a lot. Some complained that the settlers, not the Osage, would be told to leave the area. Pa and Ma tried to ignore the stories, and they fought the crops they would plant on the land Pa had plowed. Finally, the Indians could no longer be ignored in their camps in the valleys of the bands of Osage. Better war against the farmers to protect their lands Peaceful Peaceful nights in the English cabin turned to night marsh hours of fear as the sound of Indians angry chanting and war whoops replaced the peaceful music of Bob's fiddle. It was far more terrifying sound than the howling of wolves. Worse than she remembered those howling screams all of her life. Also, that Pa stood central with his gun, protecting the family. Congress wanted to offer the Osage tribe 18 cents an acre for their land so a railroad could be built. President Grant refused to allow a sale, gave the Indians such a small sum in exchange, asking them to leave. In the 1870s, the United States Congress put it to pay OJ $1.25 per acre for their Kansas land and to give them a new representation in Oklahoma. These decisions in far-off Washington what caused the OJ's councils to agree to so hopefully during the nights of debate. The Indians decided to escape the offer when they left on a fall hunt. They rode across the trail that passed right by the Ingalls cabin. Pa, Ma, Mary, Laura, and Carrie were all there when the long line of Indians were on foot and on horseback when on another reservation. The Indians were not the only people left in Montague County. Some of the settlers went to the Indians' future had been decided by a treaty with Washington. A letter from Wisconsin helped the Ingalls family decide. The letter was from Gus Goshen, who had brought Pa's farm near Pepin. He did not want to finish paying for the land, and he wanted Pa to take it back. Pa and Ma discussed returning to Wisconsin. They decided to go. Ma mourned all the work and time they lost by leaving their prairie home behind. It seemed all for nothing, but Pa was not concerned. Never mind, Caroline, he said. Wisconsin is not so bad. There'll be good fishing in the Lake Pepin and hunting in the big woods. There'll be strawberries on the hill slopes and sprouts in the wheat fields, but were a few sprouts, more or less. Okay, I'm done for right now. I might talk to you later today, or okay. I'm just gonna take a little bit break. Bye for now.